Hello, everyone. How are we today? It's 6 o'clock. Welcome. Welcome to the RIBA, the RIBA, the Royal Institute of British Architects, Future Architects talk about what to look for in practice. So I think a few people are still joining. If you can all for now put your mics and your cameras off, that would be awesome. And I think throughout this, you can ask us any questions and we will go through all the questions that you have. But it's probably a good segue to talk about this because I am an ambassador for the RIBA's associate members, but importantly, I've been a Part 1 architectural assistant and a Part 2, and as well as that, I've worked in architectural recruitment, and also I have the immense privilege to work in an architecture practice where I'm involved in reviewing all the CVs. So today, we'll be able to cover all the stages. If you're a Part 1 architectural assistant, if you're a Part 2 architectural assistant, or maybe even if you're doing your Part 3, we can talk together about what to look for at different stages. So again, a little bit of housekeeping. If you're still joining us, turn off your mic and turn off your screen. That's awesome. Now, I should probably I've got my bell here. So I've got my bell ready. And we've got some awesome guests here today from the industry, from the RIBA, and as well as that, we've got you guys in the audience asking questions. So I've got my list here, and I'm going to tell you who are the speakers. So you've got me, Stephen Drew. I've already said who I am. Time for me to move on. And more importantly, we have the awesome Oliver Lowry, who is an architect and co-founder of Ackroyd Lowry Architects based in East London. Very, very cool stuff. Very awesome projects. Oliver, there you are. Are you going to say hello quickly?
Well, I did, and that's I was like, I turned my camera on just to see my name, and then but I was hoping for a trumpet or
I haven't got a trumpet right now. I promise I'll get you. I've just got a bell. I've just got a bell, but we will keep the show moving on. Oliver, you were a Part 1 at once upon a time as well. You were. So you know, you're gonna have to. You qualified, so you've done all that. So right, Oliver, I'm gonna put you back in the background. Turn your mic off for 1 second, your camera, and we'll get you back later. So Oliver, great sense of humor there. We've also got with us as well 2 members from Benevolent Architects, which I'm excited to learn all about as well. So first of all, we have Carolina Lee, who is an architect at Benevolent Architects. So very cool. And thank you, Carolina, for joining us. And we can talk all about your architecture practice in the bed. Now, as well as that, we have Priyansha Kamdar, who is a Part 1 architectural assistant, also at Benevolent Architects as well. So someone who has just been looking for that job in practice and is now working in practice as well. So super excited that Priyansha is joining us as well. So I could hear 1 or 2 things. Come on, guys, turn in the audience. You got to turn your mic off because as much as I love being here, I don't want to hear the rustlings around. So turn off the mic, turn off the camera. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. And we have from the Royal Institute of British Architects, we have Alison Mackinder, who is a professional education program director of Part 3, which is very, very cool. So we have someone from the RIBA. We have people working in architecture practices. You have me. I don't know really where I fit in, but I've been in a few places. And as well as that, we have someone who is a hiring manager at an architecture practice. So these are all the guests. And now I probably have another 10 minutes to talk a little bit about a few things and thoughts that I have before we open it to the panel. So when you're looking for things in architecture practice, what does that mean? What do you mean, what are we looking for? Well, when you're job seeking and you're looking for places to work, you really need to think about what's going to be right for you in the short term, the medium term, and the long term. You need to make sure that the architecture practice pays a fair salary, that you can that you can basically work off, that you can live on. If you're in London, you need to make sure that the architecture practice financially can support you. But it's not just about the monetary gains, because if you're if you're part one, then chances are you're probably going to do your part two and part three. So you need to think about the company culture. You need to think about the projects that the architecture practice works on. And also, you probably want someone that's going to look after you, invest in your career, and that you can grow up together. Some people I know who started an architecture practice as a part one end up being a director on the board. Or you might find in future that you set up your own architecture practice. You can go many different ways in your career. But bringing it back to the short term, you need to think about logistically, what kind of architecture practice can you work at, which you can travel to. Will you be working remote? Will you be working in the office? Can you go to the office? I mean, there's a lot of interesting things that are popping up right now in this environment. Before architecture practices, and when I was a part one, you'd be in the office 9 to 5 throughout the week. Now we're in this kind of hybrid world setup. But as someone who's an architectural assistant that's going to go up to be an architect, you have to ask yourself, what kind of environment do you want to be in? If you feel comfortable, do you want to travel to that office? Do you want to get that buzz of working next to people? And these are all kind of questions that you need to look for and think about when you are job seeking and looking for a role in an architectural practice. Cool. So I've still got a few more minutes. So let me dissect that a little bit more before we move on. In terms of recruitment, because I've seen a lot of people that are job seeking as well. And the best questions that I've seen about when people look for in practice, we talked about it, the logistics. Can you financially support yourself while you're working? That's kind of important. Things cost, inflation, all that. You need to make sure that you've got a decent salary. You need to make sure logistically, like we covered now, that you can actually go to the architecture practice. But then as well as that, another logistic thing is, what kind of software does the architecture practice use? So for example, Oliver, who will be talking later, in Aquarelli uses ArchiCAD. He uses not Revit, but it's BIM. Do you have that kind of software, right? Perhaps you're someone that really enjoys hand drawing. Is that part of the architecture process at that architecture practice? What do they use? Is it AutoCAD? Is it Vectorworks? Do they provide training? These are all kind of things that are quite important, especially as a part one. It's the kind of things that you need to think about, again, logistically in terms of the job. As well as that, probably when you're a part one, if you're interested in residential, if you're interested in hotels, if you're interested in hospitality, then that could be a good starting point as well of things to look for in an architecture practice. Are they doing the projects and the typologies that you're interested in? But perhaps you don't even know yet because you're a part one and you're thinking, well, I don't know, I want to see what's out there. So maybe go into it with an open mind. So these are a few things that I see people asking me all the time to look for in practice. And as well as that, what type of architecture practice? Is it a large scale? Is it a medium scale? Is it a small scale? It's very, very different, the types of roles that you can have. If you're working in a company that's got 200 people, you might be an important part of a project, but there might be 10 to 15 people on that project, and that's fine too. But if you join an architecture practice which is actually smaller and there's 10 people in the office, you're going to get a different kind of experience. Equally valuable, very, very interesting, but it's going to be very different, because if chances are there's 10 people and you're a part one, you'll be doing little bits and bobs. You'll be learning a lot. You'll get a lot of responsibility on projects as well, and you will see a lot of the RIBA stages. And that's a good point as well when you're looking for in practice. What RIBA stages does the architecture practice work on? Do they work on RIBA stages 1 to 6, or do they work to 1 to 3? And if you don't know what the RIBA stages are, don't worry. I don't think I knew where all the RIBA stages were in my part one, but that could be a good one for you to look at now. And typically, if you imagine the building from the start to complete, oh, well, I'm backwards, so it'll be this way to that way. if you imagine it, RIBA stage 1 is effectively designing the front end stage, and 6 is handing the build over. So construction stages are normally RIBA stages 4 onwards. And if you're someone that really wants to learn construction details and who wants to get on site, then it's probably a really good question when you're looking at practices to ask what RIBA stages that the company does. So these are all things that when I was looking for a job, I didn't think to ask. And we will discover quite a few more of those today. So you've got the logistics. You've kind of got the ambition, what projects you want to work on and all that stuff. And you need to think about long-term stuff. Will that architectural practice invest in your part 3? Can you work in that architectural practice during the summer? Are they okay with that? Or as well as that, you've got the architectural apprentice scheme. Maybe you start as a part 1. And I know a few people who are thinking of doing their part 2 equivalent as an architectural apprentice. Does that practice know what to do with that? Or as well as that, if, for instance, you're an international student, maybe it's worth asking the architectural practice if they're familiar with visas, sponsorships, all that kind of stuff, because it's probably worth talking about that at the start. They're going all the way down the process, and it's something that that practice is not able to do or not familiar with. So lots and lots of things to think about. But I know you're thinking, oh my gosh, Steve, you're talking about all this stuff. Too much to think about. Well, we've got questions that you can ask today, and you can fire them along at any point, because there's 1 or 2 awesome members of support staff at the RIBA who are going to store all those questions, and I think you can type them now, and you can also ask the questions to all of us on stage, or as well as that, you can ask it to a particular member of the panel. So I'm going to do one last quick run through for anyone that's been joining us. And if you just joined us, I'll tell you who they are again. So we've got Oliver Lowry, who is co-founder at Accra Lowry, Carolina Lee, who is an architect, Benevolent Architects, Priyansha Kamdar, Part 1 architectural assistant, and Alison McKinder, who is professional education program director at the RIBA. So I think we're kind of getting to that point. And I've got a little message on my screen which says bad network quality. So just let me know if no one can hear me or what have you, or if there's any problems, and we can sort that out. Okay, cool. I think what we're going to do now, if it's okay with everyone, is that we're going to get our first guest on the stage. So this is the part where I've got to do now an introduction for the awesome Oliver Lowry. So Oliver, you can unmute yourself and get your mic out. And I met Oliver 2 years ago when Oliver would use me on recruitment, and we were due to record a podcast. And in the end, we didn't record that podcast, Oliver, until 2 months ago. So, but we got there in the end, and it was quite a nice, awesome part of the journey for me, because as a part 1 and part 2 then went into recruitment, I never got to see the back end. I never got to see what it's like interviewing people. And boy, oh boy, it's very, very, very different and very time consuming and very exciting, but it can also be stressful. So Oliver, you set up Accra Lowry a few years ago. I've seen the trailers, I've seen the work, and I get to see it on a daily basis, and I think, quite frankly, it's awesome. You're a bit of a mover and shaker, but perhaps this can be a nice segue then, Oliver, for you to tell us a little bit about yourself, and then tell us what you would recommend people look for in an architectural practice when they're a part 1 in terms of applying.
Thanks so much. Thank you for the introduction. Very kind of you, Stephen, and thanks to the RIBA for asking me to talk about this. So probably should declare it right off the bat. I'm probably the only person on this call that is not a member of the RIBA. But because I think, you know, that our company is a RIBA chartered practice, but I'm not personally a member, and I think that I'm really glad that I'm sort of getting to engage with the RIBA, and I think that the job you guys are doing of sort of trying to educate people coming through the system on what the realities are like is really important, because I think one of the things is that university doesn't really, if you guys are all part ones, I feel that one of the main things, as an employer, and having been a part one and a part two, is that all the stuff that you learn at university doesn't necessarily relate exactly to the type of things that you're going to be doing when you start. And so, with that in mind, I think that's, that is what it is. And until that changes, I think what you guys as part ones going into your first job should be thinking is, well, okay, what does that mean? And what am I really going to be doing? Like my practice, I treat everybody that comes through the door as an architect, right? And I tell them that. So I'll sit down with the part one and I'm like, right, you are now, in my mind, you're an architect. I'm not, yes, you'll have to do some scheduling, you'll have to do some boring things occasionally, but like I will treat everybody as a designer. And that's, I want people to take responsibility and to be able to kind of communicate their own ideas. And that's really important to our company. But I don't know how other companies do it. And I know that lots of part ones do get stuck doing tasks that are reasonably menial. So I think in the interview, make sure that you're asking that. Make sure, what not only what projects, like for me, I would forget about the sector specific thing. That all comes later. Like we still, today I got asked to design part of a hospital. I've literally never designed anything to do with healthcare before. And I was like, yeah, I'm sure we'll work out how to do that. And I think, that should be your attitude about any sector stuff. It's just like, it's a new challenge. But what is fundamental is that you're learning stuff on a daily basis and you don't get stuck doing repetitive tasks again and again. So making sure that you're, as soon as you land in the office, being loud about your ideas, being forthright about your ideas, telling the people above you that you have ideas about design, because ultimately that is the bit that you're getting taught at university. And where you get this dissonance is where you sit there and you'll put, onto a project that's going into kind of a technical design stage, and then you get stuck in that for 2 years and you come at the other side and you're like, what the hell? I didn't learn anything about design. All the stuff I got taught, I never got to apply. So be pushy and make sure that is something that you are, if it is something you're interested in. Certainly it is for me. That's the main thing that I think that our value is in, offering design as a service. And therefore, if that's important to you, make sure that is part of the interview process. Is like not only what sector, what project am I going to be working on, but what is really going to be my role, and how does that translate as I progress forwards in my role. So I think one of the things that I've worked, so Stephen works with us as a recruiter for us, and has also helped on kind of transforming really how we look at the kind of how we recruit, and also how we then retain staff. And part of our retention plan is to make sure that there's a very clear pathway forwards for candidates once they land with us. So we've spent quite a lot of time. Apologies if you can hear, it's like absolutely thunderstorm just starting to happen outside, but so spent a lot of time working on that journey from when you first have the interview with us and we offer you the job, to then your onboarding process, and then your career progression. So you have a 3-month review, at which point we'll set out what's going to happen over the next 6 months, and then 6 months after that. So, we're tending to go year by year, but we also have put together a sort of like a ladder system, which is very clear in our office of who does what at what point. So, including what my role is. So that, there's a chart that we have that says, what do directors do? Well, mostly what I'm doing is winning work. And to be perfectly honest, I can't use ArchiCAD. And that's okay, because I don't really need to. But when you start, you're probably not going to win any business, but you will be using lots of ArchiCAD. So it's sort of like, have these opposing skills. And what we want to do is move people across. We've got people that started at part two now started at part two kind of 4 or 5 years ago that are now associates. So we want, it's much more cost effective for us to retain staff than it is to recruit new staff, because of awful expensive recruiters like Mr. Drew here. So it's much more cost effective, and we build a better team working with people for longer. So we want people to stay and we want to build their skills up. So you should be asking in your interviews, how does this work with my progression? I mean, yes, at part one, that's slightly complicated because you're going to have this big gap, but maybe not. And I'm all in favor of the courses where you don't have to go back to full-time education. I think that is, and this is a controversial view, I'm sure, but largely a waste of time. Certainly was in my point. Once I started my work as part one, I never wanted to leave. I loved it so much. I never wanted to go back and go back to university. And so, you know, now there's plenty of courses that are offering that. I know that LSA, Sheffield, any others that you know of, Stephen? That are doing more sort of apprenticeship.
London School of Architecture is a good one, isn't it, Ollie?
LSA, yeah, that's and then Sheffield,
yes.
Window Sandwich just started doing it as well at Sheffield, and I think there's some others. I'm sure there is. So how am I doing for time? 20.
You've got as much or as little time as you want. I mean,
right.
I would. Ben's a good example of what all the stuff he's been up to, and I love all that, Ollie. But at Accra Lowry, he's thrown in the deep end, and he loves it. Right, he's doing his own building at the moment as a part one.
Yeah, so Ben's done sort of 3 planning applications now, and he's been here since whenever, the start of the summer. And yeah, he's loving it. He's like, my friends are doing toilet details, and I'm putting in a planning application for like a 9-unit scheme, and he's done a 50-unit scheme. So he's doing really well. So yeah, what was I talking about? Making sure that the steps are set out in front of you, and even if it's only for a 12-month period, make sure that you've kind of got KPIs. So our best candidate, the best, you know, people that work out best for us are the ones where they drive the value for us. So what you need to do is kind of understand what your company's trying to achieve, and then set out KPIs, or we call them OKRs, which are like what you want to achieve that align to the company's values. So, you know, what really the first question is, what is your company trying to achieve? What's the kind of the mission or the vision of the company? Because I don't think the sector is that relevant, but I do think, and I think, you know, what you get financially rewarded with in the first few years of your career is like not the most important thing. It's about what you are learning, and the best way to learn is really to ensure that what you are trying to achieve aligns to the company's values. So you know, what is the company mission? Like, we know ours, so we're building a company that designs the cities of the future. That's my one line that I can tell you that drives every other decision. So that means that we were trying to build this energetic company that uses technology and also considers what city scale architecture is like, and what the cities of the future, they have to be sustainable, low energy, places where, you know, humans can exist and feel comfortable. So all those things, if you can align yourselves to our mission, then that means that the pace of learning is much quicker, and also the pace of kind of financial reward becomes better, because it's like, you know, we will pay people more when they drive value at any stage. And so we don't, that ladder that sits in our office, it doesn't say part 1, part 2, part 3 architect, senior architect. We took the titles off, because that doesn't really matter to me. It doesn't matter if you've done your part 3, if you're driving lots of value because you're delivering on our company mission, which is to design the cities of the future, then it doesn't, to me personally, matter hugely if you've got a part 2 or 3 qualification. We've got a girl who's doing an amazing job, who's got a graphic design background, and her dad's an architect, so she just happens to already know how to use ArchiCAD, and she's just drives amazing value in our business. And that, you know, we reward that rather than saying, hey Nat, you should go and do your, you know, part 1, part 2, or part 3, because they're not necessarily relevant. If you can understand what your company is trying to achieve and align yourself with that mission, and then on that, you know, ask for responsibility. Like, the only way that you really learn, I think, or the way that I learn, and you know, is just by taking responsibility for stuff. And it's scary to start with, but you know, if you're in the right sort of nurturing environment, you won't be given it so that you're going to drop it. You'll be given it. It might appear like you're taking lots of responsibility. There will be a support system around you, but you should be asking for that responsibility. I love it when people come and ask me for responsibility. I want to give it away. I don't want to carry it all myself, and no director does, I'm sure. So yeah, that's kind of my overview of what you should be asking. In terms of other things that I think that we do that are more unusual, we do paid overtime. So it's something that I think, it was my big bugbear that the architecture industry doesn't value itself properly, and you know, and there's not much that's done about that. So I was like, okay, well, let's just deal with this ourselves. You know, you make change by starting at home. So we were like, if anybody spends overtime working on a project, that value actually ends up in the hands of your client rather than in the practice that you work for. So if you do 2 hours of overtime, your company don't properly value that, so they just give it away to their client. The client is the beneficiary of it. It's mad. So we sort of started trying to think, well, how do we ensure that all this value is captured and then adequately priced? So the only way we could really do that is to pay everybody the overtime first, understand how much there was of it being done. And then that was obviously a big hit on our finances, but it allowed everybody to be rewarded for the value that they were adding to our business, which is then being passed on to the client. And then we were able to try and reduce the amount of hours because we actually knew how much overtime people were doing. So that's been something, you know, we're quite, I thought that was actually the main thing that I was going to be talking about tonight. And, you know, it's something I'm very passionate about talking about, but possibly not the main topic of conversation, considering I think we're the only company that's doing it. But, you know, ask for it, see what other people say. So how am I doing for time? I was just going to finish by, if I could.
Fine.
Yeah.
You're
I don't want to hog and I don't want to underperform.
No, but you can hang around and do any questions. But I think it's an interesting point talking about overtime, and I do think it's okay to talk about salaries as a professional. And I think a lot of people worry about bringing it up, but you do need to have a salary which can support you while you're learning. But as you said, Oliver, as well, there's always potential to grow, and the more experience you get, the more that and the more value. And I think that's such a great point. Basically, sky's the limit on salary, depending on how much value you bring to the business. If you're bringing in so much value, then why not? And it's quite timely this week because our American counterparts got in quite hot water on the topic. But my view is that it's quite an important topic when looking for in practice, because you need to be able to support yourself to go to the office. So Oliver, I think that's great. Although I tell you what, I need to get this. I don't know how we got you in here. How did you get in here if you're not part of the RIBA? We might have to get John here because John's part of the RIBA.
Yeah, I know.
So accurate.
So in everything we do, we try and think differently. And so my thought was that by that, you know, if I'm going to live by those values, I should not join the RIBA.
Well, there you go. Well, we're gonna get you back. We're gonna get you back. But until then. And I'll bring this in on Friday when I see you.
Oh wait, my parting shot was going to be, sorry if that's it and I'm done.
Go on.
Is that this year students are you have more voting power there's more student members than there are non-student members, and the election has been opened to students. So just think about the power that you have and tell all your friends that you have more power than the rest of the industry to vote in the new RIBA president, and that should be something that you're definitely thinking about activating, because your voices will suddenly become very powerful in the industry for the first time.
But it was where did that come from? Was that my megaphone? Well, you're right. Well, it is relevant, and while you're in practice, you should be engaging with the RIBA, and what best way than on this vote. So thank you, Oliver. I think that's very timely. Stay around because you might have some questions from a few people in the audience. I can see a few people are typing away, which is awesome. Troy, good to have you here. And I know you have to tell me if I pronounce this right, but Swivlen says the UWE University also, Oliver.
Oh right, yes, for the part 2 sort of placement version of it.
Correct. Yes. Yeah. So that might be another one there. So I'm going to give you a break now. Feel free to stand down from the virtual stage, but stick around, and I'd love for you to join us on the panel in a bit, Oliver. So thank you so much. I hope that was useful. Oliver's definitely one of a kind, and so is Ackroyd Lowry, and I think it's amazing that an architectural practice supports overtime, and we're going to see more and more of that coming as well. But every architectural practice has so much value to offer, and every architectural practice is different, and every architectural practice is on a different part of the journey, and every architectural practice will look after their part 1, part 2, and part 3 students in hopefully awesome ways. And if not, we should talk about that as well. But here today, we're going to talk about architectural practices who we believe are doing it the right way. So on that point, we're going to move away from Ackroyd Lowry, and we can return to Oliver a bit later. But I am joined here by 2 members of another awesome architecture practice. So I have Carolina, so apologies, Carolina or Carolina. Tell me how I pronounce it first. Which one am I getting wrong?
It is Carolina.
Carolina, amazing. I was right the first time. Should never have doubted myself.
That was the beginning.
Yes, Carolina Lee is here from Benevolent Architects. You are an architect yourself. And we have here Priyansha, who is a part 1 architectural assistant who's just been looking for an architecture practice. But first, before we jump into it, how are you both this evening? Are you okay?
Very good, thank you.
Good, yeah.
You're in the office, huh? I like, oh, we got the books.
It's quite nice and professional. We chose the nicest one we've
With all
got.
the
Yeah.
architecture books.
Yeah, good for you. It's quite nice to go back to the art, and that's the interesting thing, isn't it? You would think that everyone at the, maybe at the start of the pandemic, we loved the idea of working remote, and now actually there's kind of a bit of a buzz about going back to the office. So
Absolutely.
when
we went into very first lockdown, I was like, oh, it's going to be 6 weeks when I don't have to travel. It's going to be fantastic.
Yes.
Just not understanding fully what that means.
Yeah.
I was blissfully unaware.
Exactly, and I think especially parents and family members, it was like, bring me back to the office. But I tell you what, maybe that's a nice segue. If you can tell us first of all a little bit about Benevolent Architects, and then perhaps you can tell me both about your individual journeys. But first of all, Benevolent Architects, love to know all about it.
Yes, so we are a small practice in Cardiff, in Wales.
Ah, I'm Welsh as well. What part of Cardiff?
That's about what we've got. Between us in the office, we speak like 9 languages, but Welsh is apparently unfortunately not one.
Ah, yeah, me too. I speak a little bit of Welsh. Dych chi mewn siarad Cymraeg? That means I don't speak much Welsh. So there you go.
Yeah, we between us cover quite a few languages.
Yeah.
Wow.
There's 4 of us.
Oh, I can see it. Looks amazing. Brilliant.
7% female, which is quite unique.
Ooh.
We hope. So Dan is the founder. Dan is the big boss. I have joined Dan in June in 2020 when we were in a deep pandemic, when everybody thought it was slightly crazy to move office because nobody knew what to expect from pandemic, working from home, and what's going to happen in the future. Clara, who is the 3rd architect, she has joined us in January 2021. And then following the student mentoring scheme, Pari has joined us for her year out in September 2021. Yeah. We are working mostly on residential project on different scales, so going from quite small extension to recently delivering tower in Cardiff with 150 apartments. So our scale is quite different and varies a lot. Every now and then we do the small commercial building, and our very recent one is Grange Pavilion, which we're very proud of. So that's about practice. We have small office in Cardiff. At the moment, we're all back in the office because we found working remotely quite difficult. As far as on a professional level, when just sometimes drawing or marking up was quite difficult, to nearly missing that buzz of the office where we can talk, we can laugh, and we can jog and exchange experience, which is quite nice. We agreed all to come back when we could. Yeah. Today we will be talking about the RSAW mentoring scheme, student mentoring scheme, and how it benefits the practice and the students. So we try to have 2 different points of view. We will have 3 areas to discuss today. One, we will talk through what the scheme is, what our experiences of the scheme was from our point of view and from Pari point of view as a student, and then we're gonna have our final conclusions and reflections.
Right.
Yeah, so we have joined the scheme that I think was December 2020, when, as we mentioned, in the middle of pandemic, we all working from home, trying our best and trying not to get crazy, working from living rooms, kitchens, and all funny places. Yes, at the start, we were paired with 2 students. So that was Pari and Fotini. Later on, there was a 3rd student that joined, Eleni. They were all very brilliant, very proactive, asking loads of questions and trying to make the most out of the program. From RSAW, we were given a little bit of steer what to cover with that. The program was, we were supposed to organize 2 to 3 meetings with the students and cover area of what the architectural practice means, what your everyday life in the future gonna look like. We were supposed to review one or couple of completed projects and then do review with the students of one of our live projects. At this time, all meetings were online because we were not allowed to meet anywhere. So that was slightly less fun than it could have been, but we still managed to do this quite nicely. And yeah, so the way we started it, we have prepared a little presentation about who we are as a Benham architect. This is our Grange Pavilion. We at this time we just completed it and we could not open it because of pandemic. So we prepared presentation of a couple of our projects very briefly, and then to break ice between us and the students, we did a little bit of personal stuff where we showed them we're probably more stressed than they are in the scheme to start with. We show a little bit what we're doing in our free time at the time. So like all the cooking and baking I did over the pandemic, learning how to do calligraphy and having my part one assistant on the left-hand side in the corner. So we did it to kind of break the ice, and we think that worked quite well because the whole conversation we had at the time was quite friendly, quite relaxed, and I think quite nice. We show a couple of projects that we were doing at the time. So we were just going to planning with a couple of residential scheme. So the students also know who they got paired with and what kind of job we're doing. And yeah, that was probably the very first meeting. So on that very first meeting, we also asked students what they want to get out of this program, because obviously we have some sort of program to go through, but also what is important for them, just to make sure it benefits them as much as it can. And all three students that we had asked for if we could go together through the CVs and portfolios, just to make sure that they as well prepared as they can be for future looking for the jobs, and also how to look to the jobs and what is the best options for them.
So this is when I initially joined the RISAW mentor scheme when it was introduced to me when I was in my third year at the Welsh School of Architecture. So, still doing university and all of the studio work at home from my desk, and sort of the three key selling points that the RISAW mentor scheme had that really was very valuable to me was, firstly, you'd be networking with someone in the architectural community. Again, because of COVID, there were no conferences, there were mixtures. So it was really hard to know someone in the industry. So that was always a key selling point. The second one was I was really interested to just know what practice life is like, and if any of the work I'm doing at university how will it be applicable to practice? And the last one, I think this was the most valuable agenda for me to join it, was it's some help with the job procurement process. So what should my CV look like? And should I go for a larger practice? Should I go for a smaller practice? So when I got this email from Beth back in 2020 saying that I was paired, it was a random pair with Carolina, I was really excited for two reasons. Because I had heard of Benham Architects being involved with Grange Pavilion, but they had no website, they have no Instagram, so I had no idea what they were doing currently. Yeah. And second of all, I was so excited to be paired with a female architect, so that I could really get a really strong insight into what practice life is, not just for an architect, but especially for a female architect. And to see that representation was just really important for me at that point in my career. So that's when we went for...
when we started our actual scheme with the students, one of our session, we went through for Grange Pavilion, because that was project that at this time was completed. We managed to go through, give them basically a story from brief and how that all started through collecting funding, going into planning, looking for more funding, collecting the design team, and going through tender process and then construction process. obviously that's quite difficult to explain the whole process in 3 hours, but I think as we try to tell the story about it, and that worked quite well, I think, rather than going nearly through like, oh, this is stage 1 and this is what it means. We nearly missed that and explain what was happening with the project, how that got developed, and then trying to link it back to explain where are we with the story with the RIBA work stages. So that we thought was quite nice. The next session we did, we were very lucky because we have a really good contractor doing one of our small extension, but not far from Greenwich Pavilion. So the lockdown has just been lifted, and we just, with all the safety measure, he emptied the site for us and allowed to a site visit for the student. We think that was very important because that kind of show to students the importance of the drawing, that once you're on site and once you're building, there's no computer that you can check something, there's no other information. They are building from the drawing that you provide. If there's something wrong, they might not spot it, and they're gonna build it from the drawings they've got, which yeah, we quite like that stage. It was also super nice to leave the house and go physically on site. I think for the students that was
it was just so valuable for me at that point in my studies to sort of really understand the importance of a 1 to 20 detail. I've been drawing it for 3 years and never really saw it materialize. But when we went to site and it was under construction, there was a 1 to 20 detail that Carolina drew stuck on the wall, and the wall was being built. So I said, oh wow, like this is real now. And the importance of few millimeters is just, so I think the reality check was really good at that point. And of course, it was really nice to meet Carolina and see the whole construction, and that, I think that was a really valuable experience.
Yeah, we thought that was a really good day. And then, so we kind of finish showing our stuff at this stage. And as a next stage of the scheme, we looked at the CV. I think for us as a practice, what was really good at this stage is seeing the progress, because all 3 girls, they had CV, nearly like written the very first CV that you provided, the producer in your career at this point, which was just probably written in Word, with loads of more questions probably than information. It was really good to see how that CV from the left-hand side changed into really nice CV and portfolio that we didn't show today, about how that changed and progressed. So that was, for us as a practice, really rewarding. Obviously, they did tons of hard work, but we're hoping that maybe with a little bit of influence, we were getting better and better results with what all the students produced. So that was really nice to see.
I think at this point, as a student, what I was really confused about was if I wanted to work for a larger practice versus a smaller practice. And speaking to Carolina over the meetings, she told me about her experience at larger practices in London and Paris, and how she moved to a practice of 3 at that point at Benevolent Architects. So she had really varied experience and could ask all of these questions and get almost sort of a pro-con list for what I should be picking at. But what I really sort of liked at that point was the idea of learning in a smaller group. And that's when I knew that for my year out, I wanted to apply to a smaller practice. So on the left, you can see this was my CV I had before I started to talk about it with Carolina. And she helped me, once I knew that I wanted to apply to a smaller practice, how you cater to them with your CV is different to when you with the large practice. And so she really helped me in sort of going through every detail and how to present it, and how to put pictures. Should I have my face on it or should I not have my face on it? Just conversations like that, I think, were really valuable for me as a student to just get some feedback on.
Yes, and then once we finished the program, we kind of asked Pari if there is anything else really that we could help with. And it was I think what we come up at this point, Pari asked like, oh, could I do a mock interview with us? So have we got more slides? Or?
So it was just at this point where I was like, okay, do you mind just giving me a mock interview? And so Carolina and Dan were kind enough to just ask me questions, and
there was a lot of arguments in the office, like, you would never ask this interview. Like, Yes, we would.
But it was a really, really good conversation for me to have, just so I know what I should be preparing for. But little did I know that that would be sort of the interview for the job. A couple of months into it, I applied formally to Carolina with my CV and portfolio that she had seen almost 20 times by then, but I still wanted to put it in a separate email for applying, just in case. And yeah, and then just hoping that they would pick me. And yeah, but I think in that way, that was what was valuable for me. The scheme itself is all about exchange. I found it really valuable to get all of this feedback at different stages in my CV, understanding stuff about practice, and I guess it was at the same time, on reflection, really valuable for the practice.
Yeah, so as Stephen and Oliver, as you mentioned, as you have like I don't know if like recruitment in the house or you're doing this externally, but as a small practice in Wales, we would probably not use recruiter to get Part 1 student, as mostly is down to the cost. And
correct.
Yeah, so as much as, you know, the recruitment would be probably use my levels onwards, that for Part 1, I don't want to speak for large practice now, but for small practice, we would definitely not use recruitment.
Yeah.
What was really good about the scheme is we met Pari and other students who were also, you know, we were lucky to have very good students, but that gave us that overview of what they are like. For us, to choose the right Part 1, obviously we would, you know, this is a profession. It's not, you're not in the school anymore. It's like you're in a professional life. However, we're not expecting Part 1 students to know everything, or like, it's not like you're coming fresh from university and it's like, oh, please deliver that project. Yeah. We understand this is part of the journey, that this is probably your first professional work in the office, and there's still a journey that you're learning as part of your education. Yeah. So for us, it was more important that Pari would be right fit to the office. Only 4 of us, and that was more important rather than getting, I don't know, like, let's say, oh, this is the project, Pari, please deliver this. We understand that this is not the case. That's why we're looking for somebody who would have similar ethos to us. Yeah. Who's gonna be
because by the time I applied in March, I had already known Benevolent Architects and Dan and Carolina sort of personally for almost 3 to 4 months by then, and I knew I liked the ethos of the practice. I liked the way they approached architectural problems. I liked the way they worked in the office, so I knew that I would be a good fit for them, and that was because the scheme gave us the time to sort of understand each other in that way.
And for us, so that Pari was actually the proactive person, that she was having good communication skill. The drawings were always looking beautiful. And we also saw that with a little bit only help of us, or maybe not help, but like direction, we saw how the CV and portfolio was changing. And we really liked that. So I think that was key for us.
Yeah.
And obviously seeing the right attitude to work, that was more important than all the grades at the university and projects.
Yeah.
So this is what we, as a practice, looked more at rather than the university results.
Yeah, and to end it off, this is just a screenshot of, so Carolina and I usually texted through Teams to do the meetings, and just one day I got a text from Carolina, are you free to just do a call? And you can see that we did a meeting for about 3 minutes, and that's when Dan and Carolina were like, do you want to be a Part 1 at Benevolent Architects? And I said, yes, please. And that was and I didn't have a formal interview because I had a really intensive mock interview.
As a practice, we did not have to go through all the CVs, and also between us in the office, we don't have that person to do this. So when there's 3 of us, one of us need to give up a day or 2 or 3 days, how many days it takes to that recruitment process. Yeah. And just because we're not doing this every day or like ever really, it would take forever. So that helped us make decision that could take long time very quickly, and we're like, yeah, we're done.
Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah, well, I think you come across a really good point there, and I think especially as a Part 1 and a Part 2, the search really comes down to the individual, and you have to be, especially when you're a student, you have to be your own recruitment consultant. And I think it is a big misconception that as a student, the first person you should speak to is a recruitment consultant, which is actually wrong. A recruitment consultant is usually more tailored to someone further in their career when they're at an advanced stage. And you're right, as a smaller architecture practice, you have to do everything, don't you? And what a better way than when a fantastic student comes through a mentorship scheme. It's basically it's by byproduct. It's an interview, when you get to know each other, and if the best case scenario is that you get a job, and that the lower end of the scale, which isn't even lower, but for use an expression, the lower end of the scale is that you have good experience, maybe you get a reference and you continue on with your search. So I would really encourage everyone to look into that scheme that you were talking about, Parry. It sounds amazing, and what a great show on a smaller architecture practice and all the awesome stuff. I particularly enjoyed all the weightlifting there. You putting me to shame. What's that about, huh? Guns of steel over here. I noticed as well there was shorts and slippers, so they look very summery, but then at the same time they did look very, very appealing for Zoom. So
we were in a lockdown for a long time, right?
Yeah, exactly.
You could have of having pants and shirts.
You could have comfy loungewear as well, haven't you? So I think that's brilliant. And just a quick reminder for everyone in the audience. So if you two both are kind to stick around, I think it will be great. And then you can answer some Q&As, and that's probably a nice thing just to remind everyone that you can send your question, or I think you can put it into the chat, or I think at the end of the session where you're going to open it up so you can ask all about these questions. You can ask about the mentoring scheme, you can talk about how you should take the search into your own hands. And I think that's what we're talking about here. What is the subject of what do you look for in practice kind of hints on the fact that you're in control of the search, and the more questions you have and the more proactive you are and the more you go out there, you're going to find awesome architecture practices. You're going to find companies like Aqualara, you're going to find companies where Carolina and Parry are working, and I think that's going to make the difference. The Benevolent Architects, a smaller architecture practice, they're focusing on all these awesome projects that you saw. And yeah, sifting through CVs takes like a full day, and not everyone has time to write adverts. But if you're that person that sends in your CV and portfolio to the architecture practice, I'm sure it will be welcomed. I'm always surprised that people worry about should they send their CV and portfolio to an architecture practice if there's no job description there advertised. And I always think, yes, of course, because
always try.
Yeah,
just trying.
Yeah,
and answer your email, pick up the phone and make a phone call.
Well, you're right.
Job offer in April, and I submitted
my was only starting in September.
Yeah, I hadn't even finished my third year, and they had offered me a job. So yes, do keep applying.
Exactly, and I think that the more you're out there, the more you create opportunities for yourself. So look, that's amazing. I haven't got my virtual soundboard. I'll give you a proper clap. I'm sure there's a lot of people who are interested. So please do stick around. I can see Kirsten's asked one or two questions. We're going to do the Q&A in a bit. So if it's okay with you guys, stick around. But that was an amazing show. I really appreciated all that. I'm sure everyone did here. And if you could kindly mute your mics and have a break, have a little coffee or a glass of water, and we'll do the Q&A in a bit, and I'll go on to the next guest. Thank you both. That's awesome. Perfect. Well, where you go, smaller architecture practice with big burst in the character, and look at all the amazing opportunities that you can get. And it just goes to show sometimes even a quick Google search or quickly going through the RIBA directory and applying to an architecture practice or joining one of those RIBA mentoring schemes, the RIBA mentoring schemes, sounds really good to me. I mean, what better way to get work experience and to find out more about different architecture practices, creating your opportunities and looking and finding out what you want in an architecture practice. The more you go on with that search, the more you kind of you wrestle with it, the more you get engaged with it, that will start answering itself. But do not go anywhere. Keep around, because I've got another awesome guest with me. So, Alison McKinder, who is the Professional Education Programme Director at the Royal Institute of British Architects. Alison, you please feel free to unmute your mic and turn on your microphone whenever you have a moment. I really appreciate you being here. How would you like to, do you want to first of all tell me a little bit about yourself, and then you can go on with the presentation, or whatever you prefer, Alison?
Okay, well, my day job is part 3, I have to say.
Yes.
But that does give me the opportunity to read an awful lot of self-evaluations. So I'm reading an awful lot about what people have been doing in their year out.
Ah, yes,
so,
that's true.
I have to say, when I agreed to do this, I said I would be going off piste a little bit and not just talking about what to look for in a chartered practice, because I think the year out is a great opportunity for people to actually think perhaps even beyond architecture, and certainly beyond the UK for some different experience. I have a standing joke with part 3s. By that time in your life, you're probably either thinking of getting married, starting a family, or moving house. So life gets in the way, and the year out can be a wonderful opportunity to do something a little bit different. Oh, I thought I would, the boring slides with lots of words on, I'm afraid, folks, but just to give you your options, really, so you can start thinking about what you would like to get out of that year out. We've heard a lot about working in the UK, and I think for the majority of you, that's really what you will probably end up doing, and it'd be great experience for you all. Do think about where you want to work, and we'll talk a little bit, well, we've heard a little bit about small, medium and large practices. But you know, don't discard the fact that you could go and work overseas. We've had 2 years when we've been stuck at home, you know, why not get on a plane and go somewhere? So there are options there. And it may be a point in your career where you're actually thinking, is architecture for you? And there's no harm in thinking that. You might come back to architecture at a later date, but you might think, actually, I want a little bit of a break on this and go and do something a little bit different, but perhaps in an associated sort of profession. So the options are there, and they are still experience that you can actually record, and it'll go towards your part 3. So, as I say, the boring bit, but no doubt you can read this for yourselves. That really is the regulations about practical training experience. So the first one is a sort of standard experience in the UK, the EEA, etc., when you're working probably with a UK architect. And the recommendation is that you do get 12 months of UK experience, although it's not essential, I have to say. We run part 3 courses all over the, well, I'll say all over the world. We've done them in New York. Our main one is in Hong Kong. We've done it in China and the UAE. And people there still manage to do their part 3, even if they haven't had direct UK experience. You might, as I say, the second one there, go abroad for a year. You might decide to go off to Australia and enjoy the surfing or whatever you want to do. But the option is there to do that, and you can still record that experience. And similarly, you might want to do something else within the construction industry. So maybe you've done a project at university where there was quite a focus on maybe interior design or maybe on landscape architecture. And you think, actually, that's interesting, a bit different from architecture, might want to go into that. So I think I'm sort of repeating what other people have said here about working in the UK, but, you know, large practices have their advantages. You might get a very high profile practice that you want to work for. There can be advantages because they're often multidisciplinary. So you've got that direct, you can directly approach maybe structural engineers, quantity surveyors, and so on. You've got a bigger network of colleagues. So generally the social life tends to be a little bit better from what I see with the bigger practices. Not always, I have to say, but you know, you might have more options there. There might be a greater opportunity to expand your software skills. This is someone who's barely can work in CAD. So, you know, I'm not even going to go there in any detail, but it might give you more opportunities. And they might have a better structure for CPD, so additional lectures, so you're building up your knowledge all the time with that. Disadvantages of large practice tend to be less opportunity to work across the work stages. I think Oliver mentioned this earlier on. You know, they're working on very, very large projects, and the chances of you seeing a lot of movement between work stages is probably going to be very unlikely. And you could find yourself, rightly or wrongly, working on a lot of competitions and the like. You're going to be a small cog in a big wheel, to be perfectly honest, and you're going to have less responsibility than you would if you were in a smaller practice. So with the smaller practices, or more involvement in all aspects of the project, there's a good chance. I mean, I worked for a small practice in my year out a long time ago, but I saw a project right the way through, from start through to completion. And I got an awful lot of responsibility in doing that. You've got a smaller network of staff. You probably got a less structured practice management system. So that's sometimes not a bad thing, but it can be a little bit off-putting at times when you're not quite sure how their filing system works. It's all a little bit hand to mouth. And there may be less possibility of getting an opportunity to do CPD. As I said, working overseas, well, the world is your oyster, and you might decide you want to experience a lifestyle somewhere else in the world. You might get a better, a perspective on international architecture by doing that. Or you might just want to travel and see somewhere else. I mean, and that, as I said before, after 2 years of restrictions, that's probably no bad thing. The one thing to be really aware of, though, on international work is unpaid internships, because there are an awful lot of those around. Now, if you can afford to do it, well, I'm not going to say don't do it, but be very, very wary. I think one way to look for work overseas is target the practices, and it's probably better to target large UK practices that have overseas offices, and you can obviously find those on the RIBA website. You're not out on your own there. The RIBA has chapters. They've got overseas offices in the UAE and China. And they have RIBA chapters, and they're run by architects who are RIBA members. And we've got them China, in the Gulf, Hong Kong, Singapore, Sri Lanka, the USA. And they'll be putting on events, networking events, CPD, lectures, and so on. So you can still engage with the RIBA, even though you might be working somewhere else. You might want to work within the construction industry, so you could want to do landscape architecture, structural engineering, interior design, work on a construction site. The one point here is that if you're going to get your PEDR signed off, it does need to be signed off by somebody who is a professional within the construction industry, and that's generally somebody who is actually a member of a professional body. So it's your year out, it's your decision. So you might have a particular interest you want to pursue. You might want to go down the route of historic buildings. So target the practices you look at for that. You might just want to break from architecture. You might want to travel. But the main thing is, do your homework. Don't simply apply for anything that you might see. Don't necessarily go for the easy option. Find out about the practices, speak to people on the master's programs at your university, so they'll tell you where they worked and the experience that they got. Try and find practices who are used to having Part 1 assistants there, because they'll know how the type of work to give you, how to bring you on, what you need, what support you need. And use the Find Architecture to search for practices that may very well meet those requirements that you're looking for. And I hate to say this, but finally, don't forget to fill in those PEDR sheets. And I think that's my whistle-stop tour of what I think they should be doing for their year out. Make the most of it.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Alison. Thank you so much, Alison. I appreciated that. And you will be pleased to know that even though I haven't done architecture for close to 15 years, 12 years, I still have my PEDRs and they're in the cupboard. And it was ingrained in me that you need your PEDRs when you do your Part 3. So very, very good point there. But more importantly, and I think interestingly as well, such a good point, do avoid unpaid internships. You should not be doing unpaid internships. And I do think that my personal advice here is that you should always look for an architecture practice where you will get rewarded for the work that you do in remuneration. You know, it's very hard to keep yourself motivated, especially if you're unpaid. So thank you so much for that, Alison, and some great tips on overseas. And I agree with that. I think about UK offices which have satellite offices abroad. And as well as that, there's some excellent points on the pros and cons of smaller architecture practices, medium architecture practices, and large. It's very true. If you're in a large architecture practice working on a massive airport, it's still going to be a lifetime privilege. And when you go to that airport, you're going to be thinking, I was involved in it. But you're right, the RIBA stages of the airport are going to take a few years. Whereas in a smaller architecture practice, if you're doing smaller projects, you're going to see those RIBA stages much quicker. And you're right, probably their IT systems are not going to be as organized as a larger architecture practice. Well, I think we're doing really good for time now. I'm going to check. We're actually 5 minutes ahead. 5 minutes ahead. So that's awesome. I think at this point, what we'll do is we're going to open it up to questions and answers. So there's a few that have come in and I'm going to tackle them as well. But now's the time for anyone in the audience here. If you have a specific question, do write in. If it could be to anyone on the panel, put it to everyone. But for instance, if you have a particular question to Oliver, then put that question in and I'll go through them all now. And while you're typing away, a few things that I can think of actually on the RIBA, on architecture.com, there's a lot of resources there. And did you know that as a RIBA student, RIBA student member, you do have, as Oliver said, the right to vote, but also more importantly, you have access to all of the stuff there for free. And there's lots of articles and things about CVs and portfolios. As well as that, I run a website called the Architecture Social, www.architecturesocial.com, and I've written stuff there for people in their search. So being your own recruitment consultant, what you need to do in your CV, what you need to do in your portfolio. There's lots of job boards out there as well. You've got RIBA jobs, the RIBA job boards. You've got the other job boards. I'm sure we all know of the zine, but I want you to think about it, that not all architecture practices are advertised on these big job boards, and you should be applying to them direct. And a good way to do that is the RIBA has a directory, which is always my hidden gem, and I always talk about it, that you should check. If you type in RIBA, the directory, RIBA directory 2021, I believe it's on RIBA's website, and that's a great way to find architecture practices. And then you can search for RIBA chartered architecture practices near you, and you could be that person that applies for that role down the road, and you can have an awesome commute to work. Or perhaps, as one of the guests on the stage said, Parry, and that you apply to an architecture practice that maybe doesn't have the Instagram or maybe doesn't have the flashy website, but when you meet them in an architecture interview, you think, wow, this is an awesome place I want to be. So I'm going to have a quick look now at the questions which have come in. So bear with me, and I am going to go through all of them now. So we had a question that popped in from Lucy Harris. Lucy, I'm going to read your question out now. It says, question for the Q&A. I'm in my year 1 BA architecture and thinking about work experience for the summer. I have a practice I'd like to approach. Can you offer any advice on how I should approach them? Do I offer work for free to shadow, or do I introduce myself in person, etc. So I'm more than happy to have a stab at this, but then I'll give my answer, and then what I'll do is I'll perhaps open it up to anyone on the panel. But first off, there's a few things in that question. I'm going to break it down. So first of all, do I offer work for free to shadow? I think you should not offer work to free at all. I think you should not. If you think about it, why would you kind of bring that level down? Most employers have the ability to pay you because they're charging for the work they do. So get rid of that idea of working for free, but have a think of looking at, as you talked about earlier, proper mentoring schemes, you know, and they're during your education, normally during your part one, your and I think sometimes your part two as well. There's a big difference there, and I think you need to do that research on that. But let's talk about the question a bit. You want to approach the practice. How should I do it? Well, I think get that CV and portfolio ready, and it could be a good, if you really have one practice in particular, maybe knock on the door if you want and have a CV and portfolio to give. Some people talk about printing portfolios and making beautiful portfolios, and that's quite nice, and that's your prerogative if you want to do it. But do not worry at the same time about spending loads of money on a printed portfolio if you can't do it. It is absolutely fine to send a CV and portfolio in PDF form. Now, there's lots of things we could talk about CVs and portfolios. There's a lot of content on architecture.com. There's a lot of content on my website, the Architecture Social, about that. But in general sense, I think it's, don't focus too much in this section about the CV and portfolio per se. Have a think about how you're going to approach that company. And as you said, if you've got that CV and portfolio, you could go in person and deliver it. But as well as that, send it an email, send it ideally to a person, try not to get lost into the inbox, try and send it to a director of the company. And if you're feeling bold, if you're feeling bullshit, if you're feeling brave, if you pick up the phone afterwards, chances are 99% of people do not ring on the phone, and you will make an impact. You will make an impression in that company's memory. If you're cheerful on the phone, it generally helps. Oliver, I can see that you turn on your video. Is there anything you'd like to add to this?
I think LinkedIn's pretty good. Like, I always like it when people message me on LinkedIn, just stick, you know, because it's quite personal.
Yeah.
And you know, you get straight through to the director instead of getting stopped by the, you know, there'll usually be a gatekeeper or two before the person that's going to be doing the hiring. But I do disagree. If you're in your summer holidays, in your part one and you haven't qualified from your part one, I don't think there's any problem with doing a week of shadowing an architect, because you'll learn tons. And I don't think you necessarily need to ask for, you know, like, great, I think by week 2 you should be asking for money, but that first week we've always had people in, and we're like, it's always like friends and family and stuff like that. And you know, to do a week when they're like 19, 20 or whatever, or they're at part one or just about to start part one, it's a great foot in the door, because loads of those people come back. That's how Ben, who's part one now, he originally he did a week with us, and then he did, which was unpaid, and then he did the next year he came back and he did a few weeks and it was paid, right? And then he got his part one. So it's a very unofficial, similar thing to what was being described earlier, which is like a sort of gradual onboarding, if you like. That foot in the door is crucial. You know, we don't want to give it away to our friends and family now. So me and Stephen are building this kind of AL Academy where we want to give these first 1 week opportunities to people who are from backgrounds where they're not necessarily just the friends of the people who run an architecture practice. But if you have those opportunities, or you can make those opportunities for yourself, I don't think there's any problem with doing a week of shadowing people for free, because you'll learn tons, and foot in the door, it will be an investment in the future. So if you don't have any friends and family who have architecture practices, hustle away, go add the directors on LinkedIn, and then message them personally. And yeah, I agree, walk into the office. That's what I did when I started. I just walked into a load of offices, and like, people were just really surprised. And it shows you've got some real balls, or guts.
Love it. Well, and thanks for adding that. And it's true. And hey, not everyone's going to agree on everything, and that's the point. It's about kind of dissecting these topics and finding out what works. I think that if for instance, an internship, you know, I think that where it can get a bit strange is that internships can be cloak and dagger part one proper paid jobs. But when you're on about, as you're saying, like true work experience as an apprentice or an intern,
if you haven't
that's
qualified,
very
I think
different.
it's okay to to do a bit of work for free, but it's not work for free. You're basically, you're not going to be much use in the first week, to be perfectly honest. Like, you are taking value from the company, like you're
going to be crashing the files probably.
You're just going to be, you're just going to be sitting in on meetings and
Yeah.
I'm not trying to sound mean, but like the first month of a person who's not got any qualifications, they're not super helpful. They're not really driving value in the business. So you are, to an extent, educating yourself. And I mean, think of it the other way around. You pay a lot of money to go to university, and you sit through a lot of stuff that's less useful than sitting through a few design team meetings and going on a site visit. If you're doing it and you're not getting paid, at least you're not paying money for it. That God, the amount of money you spend on university, and I don't think they deliver much value. So I think shadowing somebody for free, you're going to learn more.
Interesting. Maybe establishing goalposts and times is great. I have here the funny story, and we're not going to go too off on a tangent, of someone working a year and a half for a famous architectural practice, and then they were given, as a thank you, some nice new shoes. And I was like, year and a half for shoes? Now we're going wrong. But a far cry from that is a few days in the office and learning a lot of stuff. So thanks, Ola. I think that's really useful. And I've probably got a few more questions here and as well. So, and RIBA support members, tell me if I'm kind of getting things wrong. The next one in the order, the next question I have is actually, how many images would you include in your portfolio? Now, I think that's a bit like, how long is a piece of string? There is no number of images. I can give rough ideas of pages and portfolios, but the reality is there is no one size fits all. And I think that is, again, it comes down to research. And it was great earlier having Carolina talking in particular about what she would look for in a CV and portfolio, and what is useful to their practice. And I think that's what's the key thing with CVs and portfolios is it's about seeing relatable skills. So if, for instance, you've used ArchiCAD or Revit and you showed a little example of a Revit model, that could be useful. If, for instance, you're good at fine art, that might be really useful as well. If there's any examples of technical detailing that you've done during your architecture undergraduate course is going to be really useful too. An architecture practice as well. And no one wants to see 20 details. Well, Oliver likes details in an interview, but I guess what I'm saying,
I think 20 pages, 30 pages max. Like, it's boring otherwise.
Yes,
we sift a lot of CVs.
Variety. We want variety.
You want variety in there, but like, if it's too long, you tend to switch off after about 10, 15, 20 pages.
Yeah. No one goes through 100 pages, but maybe if Benevolent Architects, because I thought this would be a nice part, because you in your presentation talked about going through CVs and portfolios. There you go again, Benevolent Architects. Lovely to have you. Do you think you can expand a little bit about the idea of CVs and portfolios? And just before you start, just double check you're not unmuted or anything like that.
I hope we're not muted.
Perfect. I can hear you.
As you said, I don't think there's one right way to do it, to approach it. I think our industry is one of this industry where we really value being creative. So there's like, we were talking with Patty, because even with CV, there's a number of ways. You can just provide CV with a text, or you can combine CV and portfolio. It's just so many ways, creative ways to sell your best. It is very individual question, I think, as well, because everybody's good at something else. And as we like, if you're really interested in high-rise buildings, and you research the company that you want to join, and this is the type of architecture they're doing, you would probably not show them house extension that you've done on the uni. You would just show.
Sure, yes, I know what you mean. It's a different typology, isn't it? It doesn't apply.
That one depends what you want. You might want to tailor. It's obviously, you are at very early stages, so you're not going to have full range of drawings or projects that you can tailor depending where you want to go. But I think it's important to, if you can tailor this in any other way to suit the company, that would be a good start.
Yeah,
really much highlighting the skills. But as much as university skills, it's like, I think it's quite important to just show the, you know, you're always on time, you're very keen to learn, you're very keen to take advice from other people to learn, you open and you want to improve your communication skills and stuff. And as we discussed previously, even the picking up the phone is quite a big difference, just
correct.
The email and hiding behind the email.
Yeah.
Because later on in practice, and I was guilty of this myself, I absolutely hated to pick up the phone to call.
Yes.
That was being foreigner didn't help as well. But it is a key, because in the practice later on, you will have to pick up the key and call planner. You will have to pick up a phone to call a planner. You will have to pick up the phone.
Yes.
To call and I don't know, structural engineer you're working with, or somebody who works with ecology or finance department. There's gonna be this phone calls that we have to make, and obviously it will get easier later on once you start doing this phone calls. You will get used to them. But for us, it would be quite key to actually. It's obviously nothing wrong with sending emails, and if we're happy with this, we would respond straight away. But the reality is, very often we're like, oh, I just respond when I just do that one email, and then the second email, and then it's just getting missed. That might be the case. So we would really appreciate a phone call.
Yeah.
Or even turning out at the door, just showing, I'm happy to have a chat, and I'm really to have that clear conversation with you.
Yeah.
So that would be really good for us, I think.
Yeah, but just in terms of portfolio, I think when I was putting mine together, I was doing it sort of in line when I was still submitting my third year design, and I was still designing for my third year. So I didn't have final pieces of work, but the practices that I was targeting at that time were interested in thought process and skills rather than final renders. They wanted to see the process of how I got to a design decision. So I think I think
so to us, understand the process was more important than the portfolio. This is what we said. It's like at this stage of the career, I think it's quite important to show, or maybe not more important, but equally important to show certain skills that you've got as well as working. Later on, obviously that's slightly different, I think. Once you become architect and you have years of experience, that will be slightly different. And I think portfolio and everything else will look slightly different. But this is the very first attempt.
Yeah, exactly. And you're not expected to have lots of experience at that point. But as you said, it's like drive, hunger, eagerness to learn, politeness, attentiveness, but also, as Oliver touched upon, and yourself, maybe the skill sets that you do know, which is the trade-off, isn't it? Actually, if you come to the architecture practice and maybe you're a SketchUp whiz or you're really good at Revit, then that's quite a nice skill set to plug in.
What we really picked up, let's say, is, I'm sorry for using you as an example, really good graphical skills.
Yes.
Which very often is like, let's say Dan and I, like being super busy, sometimes we just don't have that time to finish something graphically, and we found it like extremely important for us to have as a practice.
Yeah, it's true, isn't it?
And we didn't ask what software it is, because like we can get really whatever, because we're small, we can get one license,
adapt a bit.
Getting permission down the line in a large practice to get software, but also showing that because Pari managed to learn that, produce that drawings with that software, she's able to produce it in some other software if we don't have it. Some practices might really value, but again, that's important to understand where you're going to put the CV, like hand sketching.
Yes, it often comes up. I see people, and it's a great talking point in an interview as well, isn't it? Hand drawing and that skill set.
That said, I have this idea and just do a very quick sketch, and again, that just showing more your thought process than finished project.
Definitely.
Correct. I think that's really useful. Well, thanks for expanding up on that. Now I've got a few questions that have come in, and I'm happy to tackle a few, but also guys, feel free to jump in. Benevolent Architects, again, that was really awesome. What I've got here now is another question that's popped in, and the question is, do you think it's appropriate for people? So do you think it's appropriate to approach people working in practice on LinkedIn as a method to find a job? Well, I think that LinkedIn's getting more and more popular, but think of it less about relying on one particular mean. You can approach a practice in person, you can send them an email, you can ring them on the phone. And yes, you can also add someone on LinkedIn. Oliver, as you mentioned, he actually likes people messaging him on LinkedIn. It's doing him a favor. That's his preferred choice. Benevolent Architects also mentioned that if someone showed up to the office and said hello for a few minutes, then that's no problem as well. So there's lots of different ways of going about it. And I always say that the correct way is the one that works. What do I mean by that? Is don't worry about doing the wrong thing. And in terms of approaching people on LinkedIn, I think if you're respectful, that's the key word, polite, respectful, then there's no problem with that. You can add someone and maybe think about what the link, and what do I mean by the link? Well, rather than just saying, dear person, or dear sir or madam, make it personal. Talk to Benevolent Architects about maybe, just an idea here, talk to them about the presentation that you saw today. I really enjoyed that project. I love residential schemes. I love education schemes, or whatever they are. And I would love to learn more about the company. Is there part one positions at the moment? There's nothing wrong with you asking questions. And I do think it is absolutely fine to approach people directly in email. If on the website there's an email address there, then why not send something? Or be bold and call people up, or you can message them on LinkedIn. So absolutely no problem with that. And it's even okay to follow up. Now, it's not fair to a busy person to ring them all the time or to get angry with them, but it's okay to say, I sent my CV and portfolio last week. I know you're very busy. By chance, can I just double check you've got it? And if you've managed to read it yet. And if the person says, I've got it, I haven't had time, you go, no problem. I'm here whenever you're ready. That's absolutely fine. You're allowed to do that. Just be respectful in the process, and it's absolutely no problem. So I'm going to move on to the next question, if that's okay with everyone. And it says, should our CV and portfolio differ when we're applying to a small and large practice? I think we covered that a little bit earlier, Leah, but a really good question, Andy. And I think so. I mean, generally, when you're starting doing your CV and portfolio, and probably when you're a part one architectural assistant, you don't have to worry too much about changing the portfolio a lot. But for instance, if you have, there might be elements of the architecture projects that you've done in university or software skills that might resonate with different practices. So I do think that it's okay to tweak the order, but you really do not need to reinvent the wheel, especially if you're in a part one. Don't worry about doing 50 different versions of CVs and portfolios and 50 different cover and letters. Get one that works, but tweak it slightly if you want for the architectural practices. So you maybe have something in a different set of order. So, you know, you're a part two and you worked on an education scheme and a residential scheme. And this practice that you're applying for in your part two, so a little bit further in the future, actually works on residential schemes. Put the residential project at the front, because the education scheme is nice, but they don't work in that sector. These are things you can worry about down the line. But if you're a part one and you're initially looking for what you should work in practice, the CV and portfolio that you've got, don't worry about tweaking it too much. Focus on the actual search. Focus on how you approach companies and finding companies, and don't rely on just one big job board like Dezeen. Look for RIBA practices in the directory. You can check out their job board. You can check out my website, the Architecture Social. There's lots and lots of stuff to check. So I'm going to go on to the next question, which is by Abigail. We've got another 15 minutes, I think, so we can do a few more questions. Abigail says, I graduated in May 2021, but now I want to look and apply for a part one graduate opportunities in London. However, I now don't have the luxury of tutors' careers. The university help me out with how to start this off. What's the best way to start this? Is it approach and practices? with my portfolio and CV, like mentioned. Thank you, Abigail. So it's kind of reiterating what I've said. So just to tell you a quick story about me, I used to be a part 1 and part 2. I worked in the industry as a part 2. And when I was a part 1, it was it wasn't the pandemic, it was the global recession in 2009. And there were no jobs around. That's what everyone was saying to me. They're like, there's no jobs. And I actually sent out my CV to a lot of companies. I had some friends which were sending out 10 applications, and they were the jammy ones that got the job anyways. But I actually took an unconventional route of I applied to 700, 800 practices. My gosh, that's a lot. But I actually used the RIBA directory list, and I went from A to Z, and I wrote to every company, and I applied to it. Now, that's a crazy way of doing it. But from that 600 applications that I sent out during the recession, I had something like 8 interviews. And in the end, I had 2 job offers, and I went for the practice, which I really loved working with, called EPR Architects. And they are a RIBA architecture practice, which is big, bigger than Benevolent Architects, about 200 people, but they were really good to me. So I felt that basically that was how I went about looking in the search. And it worked out for me. There's no one way of doing it. You can target 20 to 30 companies. You can do a printed version of your CV and portfolio and maybe take that to them, or you can send your CV and portfolio and you can go wider in the search. So Abigail, don't worry, you don't need the luxury of tutors and careers of university. It basically, I did it on my own, and I'm confident you can too. But there are some awesome stuff in the RIBA's free student membership tools. So check out all that stuff. And my website, the Architecture Social, is for free. I promise I'm not trying to plug it too much. I did create the website during the pandemic to help part 1s and part 2s get jobs. So hopefully that's helpful, Abigail. You can totally do it, and you can do it yourself, and don't let anyone tell you different, because I did it, and if I can do it, you can definitely do it as well. And the fact that you're here means that you're caring and you're pursuing it, so I'm confident you will get them. Okay, so Ken wrote the next question. And sorry, everyone, our guests earlier, if you want to jump in, feel free, just unmute your mic yourself and feel free to join us on the questions. So I've got Ken says, hello, thanks for organizing this fruitful event for all of us. I'm thinking about whether this will affect my personal academic journey to become a chartered architect. I joined a company that isn't accredited by the RIBA. Is there advantages, disadvantages for working for a non-RIBA practice? Wow, this is a good question. And potentially, if you'd be so kind enough to join us, Alison. Yes, perfect. I was wondering, Alison, if you can help me on this, because I don't think it's the be-all.
No problem at all.
Yes.
It will make no difference whatsoever whether it's an RIBA chartered practice or not. I mean, obviously RIBA chartered practices have to meet certain quality standards, if you like, as far as the RIBA is concerned. But equally, a non-chartered practice could be equally as good. They could be even better. The important thing is to find the practice that suits you best, but it will have no impact on your progression whatsoever.
Thank you. Wow, the perfect timing. You read my mind. I agree. If a practice is chartered for the RIBA, then great. But there are also great practices out there which are not, and who will look after you. And again, I think it goes down to asking some of the questions that we talked about today during your interview and doing your research to find out about companies that will look after you, because ultimately that's the most important thing, that you have a quality experience during your part 1, a bit like Benevolent Architects. And that is the most important thing to set you off and to get motivated about your career as well. So I'm going to have a quick look for 1 or 2 more questions. Now, I think I've got one here from Johanna Lupp. Thank you for the talk. Does a landscape architecture firm with a director as ARB chartered architect and qualified landscape architect still count as the 3rd level of PEDR stages? Alison.
It's me again, isn't it?
My saviour. That's a very technical question, right up your street.
Okay, so it'll really depend on what the work is. If the work is most definitely landscape architecture, then it will come into the third category. If it's a mixture of architectural work and landscape, then you could have it in the first category. But it does, it's not so much who your mentor is as much as the work that you're actually undertaking. And the fact that you say it's a landscape architecture firm makes me think that it will come into the third category.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you so much there, Alison. That's perfect. Now, I have to double check if I've missed any questions. So hopefully, anyone, guys, if Bethan, you can tell me if I've missed anything, that would be great. I think that there's one I saw, which is the what is the appropriate way to discuss salaries for an internship? How do I do it if it's too low or suitable for the type of work that I'm doing? It's a very good question. It's a very difficult one. It's a very hot topic at the moment. There's no right way or wrong way. I think people have a general different opinion, but I think that especially when an internship is advertised, they should say if the position is remunerated. And I do think it's a very fair question to talk about. Often people worry about talking about salaries in an interview, and I should know. I was too, especially when you're starting out at the start of your career. But remember to try to think about salaries not as a difficult question to ask. We are all trained by our parents when we're younger, when we were taught, and sometimes I think we hear our mother in our mind saying, you should not talk about money, it's very rude. And it's kind of a thing that's ingrained with us. The idea of talking about money is very rude. You can look selfish, you can look greedy. We have to get rid of that preconception, and it's actually okay to talk about remuneration as a professional. So there are definite ways to talk about it. You could be, look, I'm very excited for this position. I'm very interested in an interview. You could say, look, this all sounds fantastic to me. I'm sure especially if you've got one or two part ones and part twos at the moment, is there a salary in mind that you think would be fair for this role that would help support me while with living costs and so forth, while I am working with you? And that could be a nice way to talk about the salary. But I can see here I've got awesome colleagues joining me. I'd love your thoughts on how to discuss salaries.
I wasn't planning to say how to approach it, but maybe that this is worth discussing, because I would say there's a couple of reasons. One might be, if, I don't know, I'm giving completely random number. Let's say that our salary offer, what we have in the practice, is 25,000.
Yes.
And you're not expecting to work for below than 30 because you cannot afford it. We wait each our time. It's something that I think I would nearly not ask obviously up front, but
yeah, not at the start. Like how much? No, there's an element of finding out things.
If some companies have like staged interviews, and let's say you might have 2 or 3 interviews, not wrong, I think, to ask.
Yes.
Because if you're chosen and the salary is not up to your expectations, especially later on with the career, I think both sides wasted their time.
Yes, yes.
And the other, I think what's very fair, and I quite like when companies doing, when they're displaying the brackets, the salaries between this one and that one, very often based on experience. Unfortunately, being a female in a construction industry means you paid less. So I would always ask this question. I know that being 10 years younger, I would never ask this question. However, I think it's very important for us as women to ask this question.
And as a student, what we will refer to is the RIBA salary guide that they have for how much a part one should be paid, the minimum, the maximum, and the medium. And then they also further on go and categorize it according to practice, because you might get paid less if you're out of London than if you work in London. So I think that is a really interesting guide that people should refer to. And I think that is a really nice way to approach the idea of a salary as well, because I get how stressful that is and how it's almost like I don't want to bring up because it might almost just jeopardize my job. So it's always,
it's very tricky.
Yeah. So if that question is asked, you can always just be like, the RIBA has these set guidelines, and I agree with those guidelines. So.
I quite like being just honest about it, because it's like, you know, it's at the end quite important what you're being paid.
Yeah.
I have a good story. When I was 2009, 2010, I could not find a job in the UK, like anywhere, and I ended up unpaid internship in Paris. But luckily, that back then I was having like, I don't think Britain can do part of this program now. It used to be called Leonardo da Vinci program, because that was found by EU. So that was another way to deal with unpaid internship, because you can get part of the program and have salary for like 9 months, and then you could offer working for free. But I don't think it applies to UK because of Brexit. But that was in the past another way. But me thinking back about this now, I'm like, there was like 30, 40 people in a practice that we were working 40 hours a week and the company didn't pay us. It seems extremely ridiculous right now.
Terrible, yeah.
Because I was like, we were doing a good job. Obviously, we were learning, but not to pay us at all was ridiculous.
Yeah. Don't work for
that's
free
why
in the name of experience.
Because you doing a job that company is being paid.
Yeah, you're going to be.
On the other hand, I think just, it's like if somebody said, I expect that much money, we're like, okay, but I need to spend time to teach you to do the job.
Yeah.
So it is a very tricky question, and I don't think there's one answer as well.
Correct. And I think that well said, first of all, and you're right. And I think that with all of this, there is no one way to go about it. And every architectural practice is set up differently, and every architectural practice may have different pay structures. But I totally agree with you. Having worked in an architectural practice doing recruitment, actually wasting time is it's not good for you or the interviewer. So I think it's very good sometimes to set these things from the outset, and it is okay to talk about it, and it is okay to bring it up in the interview. But as you said, you might not bring it up at the front, but you might mention it. You might mention, look, and at the end, it's always good to ask questions. You should be talk about the culture. Maybe you can talk about how is the office set up right now? Is there hybrid working? And also you can talk about salaries, but you can talk about it as an initial salary. And also I think that as you get more confident, you can talk about salary going forward, isn't it? Okay, if I hit these objectives, yes, will come then, or next year, if for instance I've done RIBA stages XYZ, can we agree to have a career review and discuss potentially salary? And then notice you're not saying, can I have a salary increase, but you're asking for the opportunity to talk about salaries. So then it comes down to you and your drive. That's my thoughts there. But what do you I tell you what, I just saw it flashing up saying we've got 5 minutes left, and there's one quick question that came in. So maybe what we can do is, Tanisha has said, as an international student, I may not be able to remain in the UK while making some applications during the summer. Would practices put off if I have the request for online interviews, Tanisha? It's a very good question. I don't have a straightforward answer. I think it depends on the architecture practice. It depends on a lot of different facets, but that should not stop you, in my opinion, still applying. And I think that, as was discussed earlier, I think if you mention that from the outset, then you're being clear with the employer and they know your current situation, so that you're both not wasting time. I can see you both come online. I can see Alison. I think, Alison, you raised your hand, and if it's okay, and we can open this up. But Alison, would you like to share your thoughts on that first and foremost?
Might have put them off 3 years ago. I think these days it won't put people off at all, to be perfectly honest. But all I would say is be professional about having an online interview. I mean, I'm blown by the fact that even some of our examiners don't actually think what their backgrounds are when they examine, and you have an unmade bed in the background and you think, do they not actually look at their video to see
Correct.
So be professional in the way you present yourself. That's my only comment on that. But I don't think it makes any difference these days.
I think so, Alison. And another quick nugget before I throw it back here is that actually I do think, while online interviews there is a definite new art form that we've all learned for it. It does help to go in person if you can to an architecture practice, because it's quite good to see the environment where you'll be working in. And I have seen people that during the pandemic, and there's no one's fault because we were during crazy times, but they've taken the job remotely, and maybe it doesn't quite work when you have to go back to the office. So it's like, oh, it's not quite the same anymore. So I really do think it does help to go into an architecture practice. And I guess to bring it back to the question, Tanisha, that's one of the difficulties of when you're applying remote, but it shouldn't stop you applying. I just think, as was said earlier, I think as long as you say it from the outset, you're not wasting any time. And sorry, guys, I was hogging the limelight there, but is there any final thoughts you'd like to add to that before we wrap up?
Yeah, I'm an international student myself. I'm originally from India, and I just did my BSc in Cardiff, and I'm working here. So I completely understand the stress and the visa, all of that. But what I would recommend is, if you're stressed about doing interviews online, what I did, I was stressed about that, I just applied early. I just made
good point.
To get a job or get a conversation started before I went home for summer, and that is one way. But if you can't, just make your situation very clear, be very honest about it. There's nothing to be scared of. Nobody's going to treat you differently just because you're an international student. It's a completely normal thing, and people will be completely open if you just have an honest, upfront conversation about it, I think.
Excellent. Well, thank you for that. Stay for just 1 second, because I think we've reached the 9. Oh, I'm going delirious. It's the 7:45 mark, so we're bang on schedule. Well done, team effort. I think we're bang on schedule. And what I'd like to do now is to wind this down. But I think in particular, I've loved everyone's presentations. And what I was going to say, Benevolent Architects, where can everyone find you if they want to reach out or apply maybe and find out more about you? Can you give us your contact details?
I think we're the only practice where the info@Benevolent is our director's email address.
So there you go. Top tip: if you send it to info,
it actually works for us.
Yeah, I can put it in the chat if that would help. But info@benevolentarchitects.com is the one.
Amazing. I thought that was an excellent presentation. Everyone in the audience, get in contact. Benevolent Architects. I thank you again. Say that again. Sorry. Say that.
Small practice.
Yeah. Send over the details, but give them breather. You know, it's like they're holding down the fort. So that's excellent. We had earlier Oliver Lowry's had to shoot off, but I can speak on behalf of Oliver because I work part-time at Accurate Lowry as well as running my own business. But you can find out more about Accurate Lowry at www.accurately.com, and you can check out all their work as well. Really cool company. Benevolent Architects, I can see you chatting away. Is there anything you want to sneak in here? You're looking at your emails. You're seeing things come through.
Sorry, we were just put it in the chat just to realize Bethan or somebody just put it in. Sorry.
You did it. Yeah.
Bethan's our amazing organizer who's helping me out and keeping this steady ship. So I should say thank you to Bethan on that note. And as well as that, I appreciate the fantastic Alison. Where are you, Alison? Thank you so much for joining us. Alison McKinder, who's helping you out talking about part 1, so who you might even see during your part 3. Thank you so much, Alison, for joining us.
Thank you very much. All the best, everyone, finding jobs.
Exactly. It's an exciting time. And so, as well, who's been in the background, everyone that's been organising this has been. So we've got Bethan, we've got Eleanor Weekly, and Bethan Proctor, and as well as that, we've had a few people in the background, such as Mark Houston at RIBA. I'm going to end here in a bit, but check out all the stuff on architecture.com. You are RIBA student members, RIBA student members, and there's a lot of free goodies in there, and you can vote on the upcoming election, and you should get involved, and why not? And if you'd like to keep in contact with me, I'm Stephen Drew. I am an ambassador for the associate seat at RIBA, so when you're a part 2, I'm your rep. And as well as that, I run a website called thearchitecturesocial.com, which is a community and has lots and lots of guides and lots of videos and blogs all about how to get jobs, as well as a directory. You can search for architecture practices on my website, as well as RIBA's directory, RIBA's directory, which is very cool. If you'd like to reach out to me, drop me a message on the LinkedIn, or you can drop me a message through the RIBA, wherever you want. I think that's been us for this evening. Now, I'm going to look for my RIBA colleagues and find out if they're happy to close it down. But this might be the end of the stream. Thank you, everyone in the audience. Abigail, you, Johanna, Jessica, Svetlana. I really appreciate you being here. I'm going to go in a second. Thank you so much. I probably will turn off my mic now. And thank you, everyone. Okay, cool. We can end it now. Bye, everyone. Have a fantastic evening. Take care.